the cloud. Okay. And
Yuta, would you do me a favor? Would you lift this book out? Okay, that's much better. Okay.
there we go. Here's the, there we go.
Okay, that's better. Okay.
Okay, so I should be able to leave now, and for you to carry on. My apologies again. I was really looking forward to this, and I hope my other meeting wraps up reasonably soon, and I'll jump back in and catch up.
Oh,
with
good.
you.
So you might come back before the end.
Yeah, that's my hope.
That'd be good.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Taylor, you're going sideways on me.
Yeah, sorry. I know I'm on my phone and it's on this weird thing where so with hosting it I wanted to see if I had to let anybody in or something like that, so I turned my phone that way.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Is anybody else here? How are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you.
Well,
I liked your letter, and I would be eager to discuss what's gone on.
yeah, I'm interested to hear what
I'm kind of engaged to talk about Illich, who obviously doesn't know what's going on or takes a superior interest in it. But if it comes up, let's do it.
Sounds good
I
to
mean,
me.
we'll start with those chapters, but then, I mean, one of them is all about language, and certainly there's a lot going on the language front.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it'd be interesting to hear. I mean, I know it's difficult to take something like how would Illich view this situation when he's not in this situation, but you could still kind of take his general
Yes.
viewpoint and what he might think about something like this.
all right. So the fact that Wayne's not here, does that suggest that they are in fact having another meeting on Skype?
I mean, I never heard about anything
Can
on
you
Skype.
see it wasn't there when I came downstairs, but can you see your email
I can look at, I'll turn on my,
and see what it says?
sure. I didn't see anything. Yeah, because Matthew should be here too. Emailed me. Okay, I'll just turn off my screen and check on my phone. So I'm not...
Okay, good. I'll just sit tight here.
Okay.
It seems to be something to do with Marcus not being able to host because he just left because he's got them. Oh, there's Ron. Okay. I just saw Ron.
Yes. What's happening here? Are people hiding behind bushes?
No, I just noticed that there is another invitation to meet on Skype.
Another invitation with David, or what's it about?
Wayne sent out another invitation to meet on Skype. Although, yeah, I see everybody's email here, so maybe they are meeting on Skype right now. So I don't know. Maybe we should leave this one and join that one.
Well, that's not so easy for me.
Yeah.
Because when I tried to open that Skype link, I just got a lot of instructions I started going around in a circle and it didn't happen. So
I wonder why they can't just join this one if we're already here. Maybe I'll just email.
Could you let them know that I'm on Zoom? And you're running the meeting. I don't know what the problem is.
Yeah. They just seem to have to click this link.
Yeah, it looks like Jens won't join us. I just got an email from Jens. He's busy.
Okay.
Jens, I just got an email from Jens.
Matthew's here. Okay, there's a few more joining now.
David, are you doing any writing or research on anything else these days?
Yeah, I've got a book on the CBC,
Hmm.
which is about half, maybe 2/3 finished.
Oh, is it on the history of the CBC or the?
It's a kind of a hybrid.
Hmm.
It's about the history of the CBC. It's about my experience at the CBC. And it's about a new philosophy of broadcasting.
Oh.
I mean, to put it pretentiously.
Yeah. When are you hoping to get the baby out of the womb?
Well, I'm deep into a chapter called "What is a Public?"
Yes.
which kicks off the final section of the book, which is the philosophical section, which is to reconsider publics, to reconsider media, to ask what the CBC might be under changed circumstances, rather than just fading into the sunset as it's currently doing. So that's what, yeah, I'm hoping, well, you never like to say when something's going to be finished, do you? But maybe by the end of the year.
Hmm.
Are we talking
There's
about?
Hugh. All right.
Are we talking? Wayne seems to be having problems getting in. He sent a Zoom link.
yeah.
Did people see that?
A Skype link.
A Skype link, yeah. And I I was told it was a phishing line, so I couldn't go in through there. So I thought I'd try the Zoom. So
I couldn't get into the Skype thing. It just sent me around in circles because I think I'm not set up for it or something. There's Catherine.
yeah.
I couldn't use it either. All right. But we can't do without Wayne.
I'll send he just sent another Skype link. I'll quickly send him a note here.
Can anybody call him?
I might be able to. Let me just
Ron,
see.
Ron, can you call him?
Yeah, I'll send him.
Yeah,
I'll send him an email. Are you gonna? Do you want to send him an email, Hugh?
I can do it. I'm right there. I'm just going to resend him this link because it worked fine for me to get in. I think he's thinking he needs to manage the link, right?
Yeah, but Taylor's doing that.
Wayne. Okay. I'll send it to him right now, Ron.
David,
And
while we're waiting, can you speak just a little bit to that notion of the public and broadcasting? What your thoughts are?
Well, wow. I'm already about 35 pages into this chapter, but I had the good fortune in the around 2004, 2005, to get connected with a group operating out of McGill, a kind of scholarly consortium that called themselves Making Publics. And they were interested in the question, what is a public, right? What is there, not just the discussion begun by Habermas with structural transformation of the public sphere, which is the 18th century. So what about early modern times? So they became interested in what they called making publics, which, I mean, the two crucial moves are in the name. One is making, and the other, of course, is the plural form of public, right? That there is no such thing initially or subsequently as the public, but there are many publics. And I don't think the CBC has at all taken that in, and is operating with, I mean, if you are operating with no theory, you're operating with obsolete theory. So I guess maybe they're operating with no theory, but in fact, they're operating with the obsolete theory that public broadcasting is an intelligible term, that there's a public that they're broadcasting to. But they're manifestly, and even some of them are seeing it themselves, like when Carol Off was interviewed on The Current on Friday, because she's leaving as it happens after 16 years or 17 years, she said very tentatively, I wonder if we're talking to all Canadians.
Yeah.
Well, there's a revolution going on at Parliament Hill, and they're sure as hell not listening to the CBC. And you know, they're clearly not talking to all Canadians, and haven't been for a generation. So I think they need to rethink, and I'm trying to lay the foundations for a critical approach.
David,
Yes, Hugh.
I did send the note out, Ron, and suggested Wayne try and come in. I am in the fortunate position, I guess, because I'm a public servant, but the Canadian School for Public Service has been doing amazing stuff over the last 2 years through COVID. And we get to hear people like, so I attended 2 weeks ago, I attended an event with Margaret Macmillan, you know.
Oh,
and
yeah.
She was great. And it was just as, you know, Putin was ramping up his menacing actions in, you know, on the border of Ukraine. And so it was like, you know, the perfect moment to hear from somebody like Margaret Macmillan, you know, trying to provide context and commentary. But one of the things she said several times, and I've got notes here that I can pull out and I can maybe send them to you, but she talked about I gather she's living in Britain, because she referenced the BBC, but she, you know, also talked about the CBC and how significant public broadcasters are during this time of misinformation and all that stuff, right?
Right.
And it was a very interesting framing of the importance of public broadcasting, and that she felt that historically speaking, this is a moment in which, you know, public broadcasters need to step up, right? And you know, she talked about the diminishing of funding both in the BBC and the CBC that makes that challenging, but how critical it is for such a time as this, right? I can go looking for those comments if they're helpful to you in your commentary.
Yeah, I'd be interested. I mean, that suggests a more considered answer to the earlier question, which is that misinformation is an ideological figure. It's being mobilized against discordant opinions. I referenced the Globe and Mail this morning when a relatively sympathetic article about the truckers who are regrouping in Van Leek Hill then said, but they're all in the grips of misinformation. For example, they all say that Trudeau is dictatorial and a tyrant. Well, that's not misinformation. That's a political opinion. If a political scientist wrote, as many have, about the way the PMO functions as a practically monarchical court in our supposedly parliamentary democracy, No one would call it misinformation. They'd call it an opinion. And certainly that it's tyrannical to behave as he has done is a very legitimate political opinion. So misinformation is what other people think, and that merges with things that are actually incorrect, right? That the Trudeau doesn't own 40% of the company making the lipid nanoparticle for the vaccine, Acuitas. It's been widely circulated that the Trudeau Family Foundation owns 40% of Acuitas. I think that's the right name. They don't. That's misinformation. But a lot of what's said to be misinformation and what is canceled on YouTube, what is denounced in Wikipedia, is simply discordant opinion. So,
Testing, testing, testing. Can I hear?
oh, that's Wayne's voice. And a very nice picture of him.
We
but
can
no,
hear him.
Wayne-
Can he hear us?
Wayne, can you hear us? No.
I think that was a response.
He says he doesn't have a Zoom account. I don't know if anyone got that email. He says the link was generated a second time because Marcus could not host and I do not have a Zoom account. Skype works as well as Zoom. I don't know what you think. Where do we go?
I
with
think
this?
I just think he means by that he doesn't have a Zoom account, so he can't host the meeting. But
Oh, I
Marcus
see.
started the meeting as hosting it and then handed it off to me, so it should work fine. He should be able to join this.
Yeah, and I told him that you were hosting, Taylor. It looks just
As
like
lo-
he's struggling with his link there. Or maybe it's
as
broadband.
long as Wayne can get in.
Testing, testing,
I think-
testing. That's perfect.
yeah, he's fine. We hear you, Wayne.
I'll just send him a note to let him know that. Can you call him, Ron? Do you have his number right there?
I don't have his number. No, we usually just communicate by email. How
David,
how can he be communicating with us and we can't with him? Of course, I don't understand all this byways and pathways of computers, so I'm in. Is someone else a little more articulate with how this?
Isn't
these
it?
highways
Doesn't
work?
Illich have that answer for us? In,
Yeah, really.
In the chapter
That's
on
it.
bulldozers.
No, it's in chapter 13, Hugh. I'm sorry. We're not covering that today. Next time.
David, is that a group that you referred to out of McGill still active or not?
No, it was a 5-year. It was a 5-year project that produced several books. If you looked it up, it was called Making Publics or MAPS, MAPS. You would find references to what they published and so on. But for me, it was a very rich opportunity to think about the question. So.
Well, it looks like his picture is up there now, so maybe he's on his way through. Yeah, are you with us, Wayne?
I did let him into the meeting, but
Oh,
so he should be.
It might be something as simple as he's having problems with his headset or something, but I'm just seeing if I can find a telephone number for him. I'm a creature of ancient technologies, Ron.
Well, there's a picture of Wayne and Esther, but
yeah, Wayne and I usually communicate through carrier pigeons and Morse code, so
Yes.
we haven't got to the telephone stage yet.
I found the book, David. Is it worth poking into?
Well, it was for me. I don't know the depth of your interest in this. I mean, the question that formed them, I mean, they're all early modern scholars, right? And when they had their first meeting and convened by a Shakespeare professor at McGill called Paul Yaknin, who had brought them together, who had raised the question, you know, what is the Elizabethan theater doing? Is it not making a public sphere? They all responded, well, there's no such thing as a public sphere. It doesn't make any sense to speak about such a thing in the 16th century or even in the 17th century. So they began to explore, well, how indeed is, you know, given that public was just a character of public men, right? The Duke of Norfolk was public because he was the Duke of Norfolk. It was, Habermas calls it representative publicity. Public was what public people did. There was no public, and therefore there was no private. That wasn't the way the world was conceived. So the history of publicity is the history of privacy, and vice versa, equally. And so they set out to tell that story. How the theater, for example, is making a new kind of public by bringing people together around new objects of concern and so on. So that was followed through into the early 18th century, when, you know, Habermas says there begins to be a public sphere. So I found it very rich and interesting work. Yeah.
Thanks.
And it,
I've been chatting with Wayne on the chat. He's now chatting with us.
okay.
Okay. What's he saying on the chat, Catherine? Oh, here
He
we go.
said to go ahead.
Can he hear us?
No.
No.
He can hear, but he can't speak.
Okay.
Oh, I can hear but not talk. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
So
that's not
he could
that's
maybe
not as good as it could be, but he can, since some of you are adept at using the chat, Catherine, I mean, he could write to you and you could
Sure.
could be his voice
Sure, I'll happily.
or something, you know.
He says,
One of-
keep going. He says, keep going. I'll fix it soon.
Okay, good.
great.
All right.
I think it would be really interesting to hear Wayne's ideas through your voice, Catherine. It's like that ad on television. There's an ad they show here in Atlantic Canada about somebody going to a lawyer and you know, because they're not getting their just due from insurance companies, and all of a sudden, you know, this guy's speaking in this woman's voice, right? So it's really disconcerting. So anyway.
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of the theme, part of the theme anyway, is that a voice is coming through, speaking through us anyway, like a controlled
That's
voice.
right.
It's true. It's true.
That's true. All right. So, Taylor, shall we just start?
Yeah, I'd say let's just start with.
It's being, Marcus said it recording long ago, right?
Yeah, we've been recording the last
So,
15,
all right,
20 minutes,
so-
so we might as well start. Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna do my usual and just gas about those 3 chapters for a minute, and then we can talk amongst ourselves. I believe we're on chapters 10 through 12, which are quite disparate. So the first one, a bulldozer lurks in every computer, which comes from Ivan's book, In the Vineyard of the Text, which is one of his one of his best books, in my opinion. But the emphasis on language was there from the outset in his work. I mean, the theory of what became plastic words when he and Uwe Perksen met in the early 80s at the Wissenschaftskolleg in Berlin, and this began to develop this idea. Is already there in Deschooling Society as what he calls amoeba words. And when he comes to specifying the conditions for recovery in tools for conviviality, meaning roughly the conditions under which he thinks we could more or less permanently inhabit the earth, he names the recovery of language as one of those three conditions. Getting over what he calls the delusion about science, the recovery of language, and the recovery of convivial legal procedures are his three conditions. So what he essentially means, I think, is to get words back into our mouths that we can speak with conviction and know what we're saying. So he was preoccupied with a problem that what was that?
Ron's mic is on and he doesn't realize it.
Oh, okay. All right. So Perksen begins his book Plastic Words with a quotation from Nietzsche, from Thoughts Out of Season, Untimely Meditations. It's given various translations, but he says, you know, that words have already been made, have been strained beyond their endurance by their use in scientific and administrative fields, so that the words now, Nietzsche says, grab us with ghostly arms and force us to go where we don't want to. Oh, there you are.
Sorry about that. I had to switch computers finally.
Oh, it worked.
We lost power, and I think it may have just glitched out. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, I'm so glad you're there, because I couldn't open the Skype thing.
Yeah, let the Skype go. Sorry, ignore that. I didn't, when I got the message, I thought, oh dear, I don't have Zoom. So I quickly thought, but I do know Skype. So that's what, but ignore all that, everyone.
All right, good.
Please go ahead. Continue.
So anyway, this I was just saying is already in Nietzsche, who notices that because of this overtaxing of language, the vernacular language is drained of its usefulness to people in conveying their ordinary joys and sorrows. So the example that always stood out for me is the word stress, because I watched it in my own time eat 15 or 20 good colloquial words alive, as it were. There is nothing that happens unpleasant that happens. It isn't now a form of stress, right? So stress was an ordinary word too when what's his name?
Sallier.
Sallier took a hold of it. I mean, it was used for mental fatigue a little bit. An airplane wing could be stressed when he got a hold of it, but generally it was an ordinary word, and then it absorbed everything to itself, right? It perfectly illustrates a plastic word. It has a scientific ring to it. It has a feeling that you've said more than if you just said you were sad, happy, angry, or bored. You're stressed, so you can get a stress leave. You can't get an angry leave. You can't get a sad leave. You can get a stress leave because it's been through a scientific laundry, as Ivan says. Or Wayne quoted that passage in a letter to me where he says that It's like when it's dropped in the conversation, it's like a stone. It makes waves. It's all connotation. You feel, it makes you feel you're in the presence of something without actually denoting anything. You have no idea what the person who tells you they're stressed is actually feeling. And that's a paradigm of what happens to all kinds of words. And I think it's behind this idea that when we speak, we are, as Catherine said, when we speak, we are spoken by words that we can't get a handle on because they have no handle. They can't be given a personal intonation or inflection because they have no such property. They're pure plastic, they're pure cotton batten. They're an institute, they're a resource. You can build with them. With plastic words, you can build cities, and towns, and empires. But you can't say anything definite. And this colonization was something that he was incredibly aware of always. And so I think to this day, this view wouldn't be taken very seriously, that if, let's say I'm talking about the CBC, what the CBC needs to do, that it should take on the care of language as a task wouldn't be taken very seriously, I don't think. Words are just implements. We use the ones that come to hand. We don't have to take care about what we say. I can remember in the early, not long after I read Plastic Words and before I had actually participated in translating it into English, I was at a CBC meeting, a meeting of what we called the Radio Council. And we were then in the throes of a management instituted revolution called creative renewal, which just teemed with plastic words. So I as I will, I got up and made a speech about plastic words to the Radio Council. And the man who was later the head of radio, Alex Frame, who I'd known for a long time, he got up after me and he said, I agree with everything David Cayley just said, all except for the career damaging part. So that was Alex's style, to threaten in a friendly fashion. But anyway, so that the language chapter goes on into many interesting byways relating to in the vineyard of the text, which I won't go into here, just to say that it really was a crucial matter for Ivan, and I think is a crucial matter for me and needs to be a crucial matter for anyone who hopes to maintain the human condition as a speaking animal and to understand what that means. So the second chapter we have on our agenda is called To Hell with Life. And I don't think I need to go into those stories. I mean, this has been one of, I'll just tell a little bit about me and the subject, because Ivan was in a way compelled to speak about this. He felt he had to, and had addressed a meeting of Lutherans in Chicago in 1989, in which he said life had become an institutional fetish. And in other words, that it was what our next chapter, Corruptio Optimi Pessima, it's Corruptio Optimi Pessima in a microcosm. The life more abundant that is available to us through the incarnation becomes the life that we manage and control through an inversion that never would have happened, Ivan's hypothesis, had it not been for the offer, the gift in the first place, corruptio optimi pessima. So life is illustrative of that. And he says it's become an institutional resource and a fetish and a new sacred at the same time. So through a complex but easily accomplished for human beings operation, what you are managing, you are at the same time worshiping. And the invocation of the object of worship justifies the management, and so on. So, and so when I read this, I thought I was just astonished. And I thought it was one of the most remarkable things I'd ever read. And I convinced Ivan. By then we had done the first series of programs for the CBC, and we had become friends. And I convinced him to come back on ideas to talk about this specific subject, life as idol, I called the series, and I thought it was just a bombshell. And he knew that it wasn't. He felt that he was talking to no one, and that no one had understood him. So when I broadcast it, which I think was in 93, 92 maybe, it just went over like a lead balloon. It had no resonance. It had no response. I mean, ideas never really had blockbusters as such, but there were programs that would get a lively response. You'd get letters, you'd hear from people, they'd be discussed, people would buy transcripts. That one just had no resonance, I would say. So I came to see through experience that what he was saying was true. I think that's changed. I think the power of life has been on full display. Life, I'm sorry, I can't make air quotes every time, and I can't give italics with my voice. So there was a period in Ivan's milieu when a plastic word was always followed by a clearing of the throat. So it signified that you knew you had just said one of these offensive words. So I guess I can say life every time, but it's tedious. And I hope none of you are confused between the two lives or lives. So anyway, I think the pandemic has really shown that we are living in a new religion. Ivan preferred to call it a new religiosity because he wanted to, I think partly because he wanted to emphasize that it was in fact a perversion of the old religion rather than a new religion. And also because he wanted to emphasize that it was nothing as definite or hard-edged as a religion. It was a sensibility. It was a feeling about things. For those who don't know this, I got into quite a lot of, because I wrote about the pandemic a fair amount and wrote and emphasized a number of times this point about life. I was taken to task by two European friends, one a French philosopher, I guess you would say Jean-Pierre Dupuy, and another Austrian theologian who, Dupuy was an acquaintance. Wolfgang Palaver, who's professor of theology in Innsbruck, was more a close friend. But both were very distressed with what I wrote and very, even more mad at Giorgio Agamben, and felt that Illich was either wrong or being misrepresented. To varying degrees, they left the question open whether we were correctly interpreting Illich. So I wrote a long essay called Concerning Life that's on the blog section of my website that tries to get into this issue. And it's written more recently and in the light of the pandemic and the chapter. And the only other point I think I really want to make strongly about that chapter right now is that the chapter is equally about death as it is about life. And that, I think, is because you can't think of either separately. And so it's in Ivan's theology of death, if I can say it like that, that his theology of life is rooted, and vice versa. So I think the attitude to death that has been evinced in the pandemic, no one must die. Death is the ultimate evil to be avoided at all costs. And indeed, if you even reckon the costs, you're probably some kind of heartless person who values the economy more than they value life. Or like there were various ways in which people were discouraged from reckoning the costs of so-called lockdown or of panic or spreading panic fear through the population or whatever else was done. That was all in the name of life, and what an effective sacred it now is, I think, is illustrated by the way things have played. So that's chapter 11. Chapter 12 is kind of impossible to summarize, and is the origin of the whole book, as probably lots of you already know, that it was when I first went to see Ivan. We had met, but when I went to State College, Pennsylvania, to do feature interviews for the CBC in 1988, he astonished me at the end of, I think, 8 days of conversation for which I was thoroughly briefed. I had read every word he had written. I found out that there was a lot I didn't know, because he said on the last day that he thought the whole history of the West could be summed up in the maxim corruptio optimi pessima. And as I was with his position on life, I was amazed and very eager to find out what he meant and what the implications of that would be. What does it mean to see modernity as an extension of church history, another way he had of putting it, or to see, as Charles Taylor said in his preface to the book that eventually came out of the conversations we recorded, that seeing the West as the perversion of the gospel is distinctive. It's different than being for or against Christianity, which, according to Taylor, you could make a sketch of modernity based on whether one was pro or con, and that so a completely novel position was being laid out here. Now, I would say that in the event it has been shown not to be a completely novel position, because quite a few people were thinking in different ways along these lines. And it was only after Ivan was dead, for example, that I read John Milbank's Theology and Social Theory and found Corruptio Optimi Pessima in the final pages, where at the culmination of Milbank's argument, he says exactly what Ivan had said. And Taylor partly got on board because he himself had been saying the same thing in a secular age, and it turned out that Illich was not quite the voice in the wilderness that he perhaps thought he was in his final years. So my efforts to find out what the implications were and what he had to say about it led me to eventually record the interviews that became The Rivers North of the Future, published after he died. And then that made me feel, because of his strong emphasis on the provisional, tentative character of what he repeatedly called his hypothesis, needed further work, that what really was that he was only sketching what he had come to, and felt there was much more to be done along these lines. I felt it was up to me, insofar as I could, to try and bring his thought together and locate that idea in his thinking as a whole. So that's, in a way, the genesis of the book. And I continue to think that it is a research hypothesis. That is, that much more can and will be said about it. And that if you see the truth of it, and it's a truth at two levels, because Corruptio Optimi Pessima by itself is a proverb. It's a general, it's not just about Christianity, it's a general observation. And I've been, by chance, because I'm doing this book we spoke of on the CBC, and because I remembered Francis Bacon's writing on the idols, what he calls the idols of the theater, the idols of the tribe, and so on. I thought I needed to go back to this material on the idols and the Novum Organum, started reading Bacon, and I'm still involved in that. He's a very good writer and kind of fun to read. But when you see his hopes, everything is wrong. Knowledge is in ruins, and people believe wrong things. They don't do enough experiments, or they do too many. They're rationalists or they're empiricists. Nobody has the right idea except him. Inductive science. And his hopes are extravagant. And sometimes I don't, not Schadenfreude, but if you could invite Francis Bacon to the presence and say, have a look, this is what you've engendered: mass superstition that believes itself to be science. Is that not worse than plain superstition? Isn't superstition that calls itself science worse? Corruptio Optimi Pessima. And so I think it's there. I mean, perhaps some of you again will remember this, but there was a part in that interview, and I wasn't in the driver's seat at all. I was just there to record. I had finally convinced him that he was going to tell me this story, and I didn't know how he was going to tell it, and I wouldn't have known how to elicit it. So I just basically turned on the microphone and smiled. But not long after we began, he interrupted himself and he said, I can't go any farther without saying this, what I've avoided saying for 40 years. One cannot think about this without, I can't remember exactly the words now, without facing or something, the temptation to curse the incarnation. And I that's fairly explosive from my idea of what a Christian is. And so that he dared to say it to me was remarkable. Well, hi, Marcus.
Hi.
And he, and editing it, I mean, I didn't know what to do with that. That's so easy to misunderstand. And yet he wanted to say it. That's how deeply he felt that you had to face the shadow, that you had to look and see. And I think that it's, we'll talk a little bit more about next time about apocalypse and what an apocalyptic understanding is. But I think corruptio optimi pessima is an invitation to go back to the source. And it's not only an invitation to go back to the source, but it's a call. It's an imperative in a certain way to go back to the source. You can't go anywhere else. You have to go back to the beginning and see what this is. What is the thing that we have misunderstood or corrupted? And so I think that's the great hope that's in this. But it is, it does put, well, it's the same with language, really. I mean, it puts reform efforts that don't go to the root a little bit into perspective, right? The task is really to rethink. The task is to evacuate in a certain way. And so I'm free associating, but Taylor wondered if I would talk about what went on in Ottawa. And Marcus and I had a brief correspondence about it. I see it as a kind of eruption from the political unconscious of Canada. I see it as something that's a kind of blind force involved in it. So I think it's a little bit wrong to just pick at the edges of it and say, well, yeah, somebody yelled at somebody wearing a mask, or, I read in the Globe this morning, a Sikh trucker said he was abused at the Alberta border. Go back where you came from. I bet he was. I can believe it. There's a lot of ignorant stuff being said on both sides. But I think the convulsive part of it has to be seen, and I don't know why. I mean, one entertains strange hopes at times, and for some reason, as the convoy approached Ottawa, I really, part of me was hoping for a conversion, that people would look and see, wow, these guys came all this way in their trucks. Like, maybe we need to talk to them. Maybe we need to find out who they are and why they did that, and what this is meaning to them. And you know, that, and maybe in some odd way it happens, maybe through the back door, something happens. People are changed. People, maybe after you've won, you can face the fact that you've lost, or because you can take solace in the fact that you've won, or I don't know. But I think it has to be seen in big terms and not reduced to what goes on at its fringes. So I'm going to stop there.
Were there any questions that were asked of you through email that you'd like to address right now?
Well, Wayne asked, what, Wayne, do you want to try and restate that?
I don't have it in front of me.
No, but it just off the cuff, because otherwise I'll just say it.
Well, just say it. Just say it. Go ahead. Yeah. Then.
Well, starting from a quotation from Erasmus,
Yes.
which is that human beings think mainly in falsehoods, rather, or their minds are made for falsehood more than for truth.
Yes.
And then quoting Illich, that our words are not our own, that we are spoken rather than speaking. Wayne went on to then ask about today, right? And about social media and what would Illich have to say about all this. And he also referenced an article by Andrew Nikiforuk in the Tyee about the truckers. And so I don't know if I can really answer it. That's the thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
The big thing for me in all this, or social media, whatever, the truckers, is that I think what has gone on in the pandemic from an official point of view has, and I would include in that not just governments, but the CBC and lots of people and people I know, is essentially a reactionary and reassuring move. It may not be that this is a ploy by the World Economic Forum. It may not be that vaccine passports are a way to digital currencies. But to call that misinformation, I think is completely wrong, because opinion can't be opinion and apprehension can't be. It's not information at all. It's feeling, and I think this has been widely overlooked. So, and people are being pushed into worse positions by not being engaged with and listened to than the so every denunciation makes the situation worse. Every ostracization, every failure to recognize that these are our neighbors, and then to say that they don't recognize us as their neighbors when we're not recognizing them as neighbors. I mean, it's war psychology. It just gets worse. But to go reactionary, I would say that reactionary means that you try and re-establish what is already gone, what you can't reestablish. The authority of science in some sense that would have been understandable to Francis Bacon. The authority of media in a time when everyone has become a broadcaster, and you're not going to restore
Right.
you're not going to restore the authority of the old media. So I think a failure to recognize an apocalyptic situation, a revelatory situation, is the worst reaction one can have to this, right? So, and when yeah. So I don't know. I mean, how would I know what the answer to social media is? I don't, that's the last thing I want, is a computer in my hand at all times. So I don't even have a smartphone. So I barely understand it. I don't use social media. I don't want to use social media. But I read a very fine book, just finished it last week, by a philosopher who writes in German, Korean name, Byung-Chul Han. Do you know him?
Yeah, very well.
Okay. Well, this is a book called In the Swarm.
Yeah.
And it's a short, pithy book, 80 pages.
All of his works are like that. They don't get more than 100 pages.
Okay, well, he's I should emulate him. But he really, I think, makes a very good analysis of the implications of having media power as dispersed as it is. Mm-hmm. But, and I don't want to go into that now, but what he sees. But if it is indeed already dispersed, then the apocalyptic advantage, weird expression, is to look it in the eye. The worst thing is the reaction, which says, well, we've got to go back, we've got to have authority, we got to restore authority, we've got to restore order, we've got to get the old media back up on their horses, we got to and I mean, the reporters just don't understand it. When they're not treated with the deference they think they deserve by people in the truckers group in Ottawa, they just think that's because they're dealing with yahoos, ignoramuses,
right,
misogynists, racists, whatever. There's lots of words. It's white supremacists. There's lots of words at hand to show.
It must have been shocking when it was the New York Times that was pushing back at. Did you know about how the New York Times was in a little bit of a joust with Carol Off?
No, tell.
Yeah, they had people on the ground, and so the New York Times was reporting on what they were seeing, and Carol Off was rebuking the bureau chief for getting it wrong, and she just pushed right back and said, "We have people on the ground. Do you?" So it's a Twitter feed. You can see the exchange between them. But it was if it hadn't been for the New York Times, I don't think anyone could have spoken back.
Well, I mean, it was. I think with the. I think the CBC basically were, as it were, embedded with the police. So Rebel News is about the only media that identifies with the truckers and goes amongst them and is always treated with the greatest friendliness and respect because there's someone who's with us. But so that's how I would set it up without pretending to have an answer. I think I think some of the answer must be renunciation.
Hmm.
And I don't know how to make renunciation politically articulate. I mean,
Or
and I mean
palatable.
that it goes back to tools for conviviality, then, to defining the roof, right? You can't have constant communication and quiet spaces of reflection and meditation. Language cannot gather itself and become articulate if it's continually overwhelmed. So it seems to me there's just a question of nearly of physics involved in social media. They have to be, to an extent, renounced if there's going to be any thinking at all. And I mean, Byung-Chul Han basically was a kind of Heideggerian, I would say, from the way I read him. It basically says thinking is over. Well, he's probably right, unless a new philosophy of media can assert itself, right? That media are the very means of thought, and they're not transparent. They're not simply vehicles, right? And I would say that that's one insight coming out of an intellectual revolution that has been proceeding throughout the 20th century and now into the 21st, and is stalled because its implications are radical, and because the move to restore order is a lot more popular. But I don't see how it can go any other way. Wayne, I don't know, that's barely an answer. It's more like free association.
No, thank you. Yeah, obviously there's no answer in that kind of set of questions either. I agree. And so, but thanks. There are lots of ways into that discussion. Oh, sorry, go ahead, David.
Well, you finish.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'd love to hear Rodney a little bit more about this fellow, but say what you were about to say. And Rodney, if you're game to say a little bit more about this Korean writing in German that you mentioned, David. Anyway, you were going to say.
Well, it's just that at the end you quoted from the gospel.
Yeah.
And I think it was, what did you quote from John's gospel?
If the Son shall set you free, you shall be free indeed. And then the truth. I think it was the truth one as well that I quoted, as I recall.
Right.
Yeah.
So
trying to get my head around what is freedom. I guess that was part of it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that is the saving knowledge.
Yeah.
Right. That the truth is another person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who may ultimately be a divine person, but we don't know that much about that.
Mm-hmm.
Not as much as we think.
Mm-hmm.
So we start with one another.
Yeah.
Then I think that is the only way out
Mm-hmm.
Of this. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. That's good. Thanks, David. Rodney, are you game to say a little bit more about that fellow?
Yeah, he's an interesting fellow. I've been reading for, I don't know, the last couple of years. He's a very interesting writer in that, as I alluded to before, his books are rarely more than 100 pages, and yet it's the slowest 100 pages that I read. because every statement is so packed. I don't know if you found that, David. And
Oh yeah, I love the book.
yeah, it's wonderful. He, to my knowledge, has not read Illich, but many of his lines of thought are very parallel to what you find in Illich. And I find him to be one of the most insightful critics of where we are right now, and the manifestations for young people. I don't know if you remember when we first started, I mentioned that I live alongside 10 university students in community.
Mhm.
And his work has greatly helped me understand how they see the world and how they feel the world, you know, as an embodied person. That kind of hyperactive anxiety in which they live, in which anxiety is endemic to their very existence, and in which there's little, they see little direction outside of that. Very little, that they're drawn into social media, and yet crave for the personhood of the other to be in front of them. And so it's these contradictory drives that they don't know how to reconcile. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, I think that's good. That's really good, Rodney, because I mean, it's been I like that last part. I mean, one of the things that, the CBC for me is now largely inhabited by Martians. But I like them very much. I like them very much. Do you know what I mean? I find them charming. I'd like to talk to them. And so, yeah, I think I think we need to have bridges. Maybe you're building bridges in your dialogues with these people. I'm trying to, in a way, build a bridge to the CBC as it is now, and say, well, but there has to be a space for thinking, right?
Yeah.
You can't get out of a grotesque confusion of names, words, signs, symbols without thought, without carefully understanding what all this is. And so, I mean, that's a project for, yeah.
If I can just say one thing, I think that, well, many of us are tied to universities, but I don't think that the university has come to terms or understands the world in which our students live. And the words that we bring forth, I think, ring largely hollow with our students. In that, even the thought patterns that we think with are alien in many ways. And I'm not saying that we should move into an alien existence, but to understand our students and to be able to draw them towards something else requires that I think we understand where they're situated.
Well, yeah, that for me is the question of mediation, right?
Yes.
And mediations are of many kinds. And I mean, I'm of course interested in communications media, right? But thought has its linguistic medium and on, right? And one of my favorite writers is a media theorist at Yale called John Durham Peters, and I think it's his last book. It's called The Marvelous Clouds, which is trying to put media theory into conversation with natural things also. So, yeah. But I think we have to understand these mediations, and that can be, and they can then be bridges.
Catherine, I've noticed that you've been sending us little notes along the side of the chat, in the chat, and I think you're quite adept at doing that, which some of us are not so used. But if people don't have the chat, the little chat thing, it might be just interesting. I find them all interesting. Thank you, to look at them. But you can do that in the recording, I guess, as well. So anyway, just to mention that. But Catherine, would you say more about, you said this very last one I'm looking at least, at 137, you said that the National Post also had someone on the ground, and I take it that it was not giving the same kind of message, the person was not giving the same kind of message as perhaps most of the other media. So is there something to add about that? That would be my question.
I would just say that she went and walked. I think she was a couple of blocks away, and would go and walk like regularly through the day and the evening. I came across her. There was an interview between the National Post chief editor and another journalist, and it was a bit of a debate. And so I started to follow. I don't have Twitter, but I could find it online, and sometimes it let me read more of the thread, and sometimes it stops. But she is far more, to use the word convivial, was far more convivial in her approach, and it was striking how differently I'd read a story and then read her take on it, how utterly differently they were seeing the whole of it. And I would say that there's another article that I posted, a blog post by a woman called "We Are an Ecosystem," that is her processing, coming from having been more in what she called the left progressive side of things, how she's worked her way through. And she too is taking a far more convivial approach. And her line that's italicized is "let people surprise you again." And that's how the stance that I saw in Rupa as well in the National Post is this whole, it was very Ivan Illich. It was, let me be surprised, let me be open, let me listen. And so both Rupa and the author Alana of this piece that a friend sent me, where it's a reflection on the convoy and how she works her way to a far more open, convivial spirit to the other. Alana Lewandowski, I posted it in the chat as well. "We are an ecosystem, a ceasefire on fear." Yeah, it's just it's whether they're influenced by Ivan Illich directly or not, there is language that's showing up that's very resonant. Particularly this notion of surprise and letting the other person be a gift to you is what strikes me about both of those.
Well, we had a number of friends who went to Ottawa for this thing, partly because of the circles we live in. Being unvaccinated is a thing, and so I mean, I've made quite a study of this over the last month because because of my media habits, which means that I will read the Tyee, that I'll read left-wing media, that I'll read the National Post and the Globe and Mail, that I also get a lot of alternative stuff. And so you see across the board, and it's worlds that have drifted out of communication, right? So people who we knew who went to Ottawa, I mean, found it an extremely convivial affair, were you know, were touched, were deeply touched by what happened there, what they saw amongst the people. And that, I mean, I was, the gathering after the first week in Toronto on the Saturday, which I did go to and went amongst people and talked to them, had the same character and deeply friendly and relatively diverse, but deeply friendly, and yet, you know, I can talk to other people that I know who are convinced that these are all bigots. White supremacist is thrown around quite a lot, and so I mean, it's very, very hard to see this happening, right? Instead of coming together, being driven apart, is really, you know, I think it's, I mean, I wrote a letter to a bunch of senators today about the Emergencies Act, and, you know, I mean, that's what I said was, you know, you've got to restore the middle here, and you've got to call people to the middle, not the mediocre middle, the difficult middle, where you can hold these things together and begin to end the polarization, right? I mean, there's no justification whatsoever for the Emergencies Act. They didn't need its powers. They didn't use its powers. And even if they had needed or used them, the occasion for needing them or using them is past. They don't need the Emergencies Act to prevent the truckers from getting back onto Wellington Street. They just need a bus across the road. So it doesn't make any sense what's going on, and yet it goes on. So, and I you know, reap the wind, sow the whirlwind. Sooner or later, your enemies will justify your feeling about them, and you'll justify their feeling about you because you're enemies. Us against them, I think someone once said.
I dare say. So, David, one part of the question that I did ask you was, I'll just say I pulled it up just now, but in quoting the media-saturated modern person, I asked, in today's phenomenon of ubiquitous social media, I said, is this not a case of uber saturated media? And if so, then as a bit of a question around that, like, in the way that my observations have been of how the constant retweeting and all this stuff, and I don't participate in that. I keep a website, that's it. What I see is very little thought. So part of me, as a way of kind of questioning that, is I wonder how much thinking has gone into either side, granted, on this issue. How would a person like Illich think to help bridge those communication walls, really, or walls that break off completely? It seems like it's the wall in Jerusalem against the Palestinians. Like, so how does one bridge that? What would, I know conviviality in a general way, but what in a practical way would you think were you to take some of this understanding and apply it to what has just happened, not only in Ottawa, but the enormous buzz of social media that is so fast and it's so symbols just going forever. There's precious little rational thinking on either side, it seems to me. And I think the left is just as bad as the right in that way. Does that make sense, the question? Or
well, it does, but I can't answer it, of course.
Yeah, I
except to say that I can't see any alternative to turning it off.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You can.
Now, I mean, you can look in the past, and if you try to take the past seriously, rather than thinking, well, they didn't know anything, right? Mm-hmm. They're completely out of date. So, for example, early 16th century, how alarming the flood of print was, and the things that were said, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the desire of the scholars and grammarians and humanists to regain control, to bring this flood of vernacular literature back into order.
Yeah,
and so I think social media probably it's true. It doesn't. Byung-Chul Han is right. It leaves no space for thought. There has to be. I mean, one of his most interesting figures is of transparency, which is one of the great goods of our world. And he says, no, there'll never be political authority so long as there's transparency, because political authority must operate by taking it in secret. It must have a space in which to take counsel with itself. Whether it's just or unjust, good or bad, it's nothing at all if it just is, that famous story about whatever, was it Jean Jaurès, who the crowd went by and he said, I have to follow them, I'm their leader. Okay? So, and that's how it is now. But on the other hand, and this is an important other hand, I think, people who, I mean, I've been called anti-science quite a bit in the last little while, sometimes implicitly and sometimes explicitly. And I think of myself as a person who's spent a lot of time thinking about science.
24 hours of broadcasting on it, I dare say.
Right. and so it's odd to have that accusation thrown, right, by people who essentially don't know anything about epidemiology, or even really what it is, or likewise virology, or all the other sciences that are currently at play in this thing. So a lot of what is being said to be misinformation and is even being censored is in fact not misinformation. It isn't, sometimes, as I said before, it's not information at all, it's feeling, but sometimes it's just unwanted information. You don't want to know that the person who first thought up the possibility of delivering vaccines through RNA doesn't like this technology, is against it. So Robert Malone, or I mean, from the very beginning of the pandemic, from the time that what's his name? What's Ioannidis' first name, Yuta? John Ioannidis? John Ioannidis at Stanford wrote a piece right at the beginning, first week of after the declaration of the pandemic, and he's a well-known medical statistician in good standing, said, we could go over a cliff here if we act in the absence of any reliable information about what this is and what its mortality is apt to be. And it's happened. It's happened as he predicted. Most of the people in my milieu still have no idea what the infection mortality is. They have no clear idea of how many have died or how many have been sick, or everything about it is murk, right? And very often the people that I'm hearing and reading through podcasts online have as good a case to make as the officials, are as credible as Dr. Fauci, who isn't really that credible. And so I think it's easy to get a hold of the wrong end of the stick and portray social media or podcasts or the whole world as being just a cesspool of misinformation, when in fact, there's a kind of democratic revolution going on, and people probably in general who inquire for themselves know more about science than the people who call them anti-scientific. Now they may not get, I'm not saying they get everything right. Who gets everything right?
Of course.
Right? But I think the way out has got to be the way through. It isn't back to some imaginary time when science spoke with one clear, pellucid, oracular voice, and everyone saluted. That time never existed, and we wouldn't want to go there if it had. So yes, I mean, just for an old man like me and not very adept at the technology, I mean, the website I started after I left the CBC has been an extraordinary boon in certain ways, in bringing people to me and bringing me to people, and in starting conversations and in making new friends. So if what goes, and that's a little backwater of the internet where I operate, and a day doesn't go by I don't get 2 letters saying, we can help you. We can optimize your ranking. You probably get them too, Wayne. I don't want my ranking optimized. Can you make me more obscure, please? But
I don't know.
But so I don't want to be better known, but what has happened through that has been quite a blessing in a lot of ways. And I didn't want to do Zoom at the beginning of the pandemic. And now I look forward I look forward to hanging out with all of you, and so you have to take that seriously. So it's yeah. So I don't know what that means, except that the way out is the way through.
Can I insert that I was it was so timely for me. I was teaching a European Lit course to undergrads, and I used Corruptio Optimi Pessima. I said it in English over and over again, but that was the theme of the course.
Really?
We found it in Dante's Inferno. It was that circular journey, that the way up is the way down, and you have to see the very worst. At the bottom is Dis, who is Lucifer corrupted, the corruption of the best is the worst. And then Dostoevsky's Underground Man and Flaubert's Madame Bovary. We could find the theme running through all of the literature, and it was a simple way, speaking of the circular journey, but it's a spiral. It's not just a circling round and around and around. It's heading somewhere. And so it was very timely for me, I'll tell you that.
Oh, nice. Well, good.
I was just going to call him Marcus. We haven't heard your interactions. It'd be nice to hear about David, but David, say what you were going to say. Sorry.
No, I was going to say this is the thing about Zoom, right? That when you're finished, we need a code for over and out. So Roger Wilco.
The host just clicks and we're all gone. But Marcus, you and David obviously did a little bit of interaction. Do you want to share a little of that, or is that germane to some of these chapters we're discussing?
Oh, I mean, I had shared with, I like listening to a podcast called what's it called now? The Burning Point? With Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty. They used to be on Rising. And they interview, they have I think a fairly sane middle. They hold that middle fairly well. She's on the left, he's on the right, but they have decent, intelligent conversations with each other. And there's a regular guest. I think he calls himself the Funky Academic or something like that. And he's an African American, and he had a very interesting essay on freedom and the nature of freedom and the relationship between freedom and meaning that I shared with David. I can throw that in somewhere. I'm still thinking about Rod and his 10 university students. And oh, you're still there. I thought you had left. And this communication gap. And that contradictory impulse between, living, as David said, with a computer constantly in your hand, and still experiencing this hunger for the embodied personhood of the other to stand before you. And I know, as I'm thinking about like, where are the spaces? How do we, where in this age can we, harness the kind of overwrought technology to connect in, like, sometimes I think about the way, Paul made use of the imperially controlled and pacified road system of the Roman Empire to travel and connect with Christian communities that were also not hoping to be at the time made more noticeable. They were also hoping for greater obscurity for good reasons. But yeah, if David, if you have stories, or Rod further story, like, just of examples of, how and where those kinds of embodied, convivial, thoughtful, events can happen in a way that can inspire us and spread as new models for new times. I keep thinking of Illich's comment that, all we have left to do is make spaghetti or something like that. And I think that's not just at this point in the, just to get together in a diverse group of people and make spaghetti together and have a meal and have a real conversation, is a pretty profound thing to consider. Especially with the fear of infection hovering over us. I mean, there's a non-symptomatic case of COVID at the farm right now, and we're kind of we're avoiding each other pretty strenuously. That's anyway. I hope I didn't throw in so many asides to blur the question of that. I think really just David or anyone else, if you have stories about how you're gathering in a way that is embodied and thoughtful, I'd love to hear about it.
Well, here we are. I mean, I don't know if I have a lot of stories. I certainly have never been blessed as many times ever as I was in that crowd in Toronto on the first week of the truckers convoy. And I would judge that many of my interlocutors felt themselves to be Christians. So I come back to this idea that what happened in Ottawa, and to some extent here, and maybe also in Winnipeg, and I don't know where else, was kind of extraordinary. People feeding each other, people taking care of each other, people manifesting a joyful, taking a lot of, manifesting a fairly joyful spirit. And some of it kind of cheeky, like setting up the inflatable hot tub by the parliamentary entrance there, like it was kind of a Yabo manifestation, right? These guys in the hot tub while they're going in and out. I mean, it's a little cheeky, it's a little rough, but it's kind of beautiful in a way. It's also, and it's like, here we are, right? Your subjects have arrived. And so I don't know where it's going, right? But I think one ought not to spurn what does happen, what does appear. And a lot of people seem to me to be devoted to spreading anxiety, to spreading. If I haven't read it all yesterday, but the Tyee yesterday, which keeps me in touch with BC to a certain extent, and Andrew Nikiforuk was an old friend. They're just spreading division, right? Just anxiety, worry about that everything is wrong about this, right? And so I don't know how things can be put back together without a disposition to peace as a primary axiom, as a starting place, right? So, and it doesn't seem to be there to any great extent. That so I don't know. I mean, I can tell you my pipe dreams about a whole a redefined politics, but I've been dreaming that dream since the later 1970s, and Ivan set it out as clearly as one can set it out in some of his essays, right? That we need a new political map, right? That the current camps are just so restrictive that they don't, and now suddenly I find myself, in the middle of, where I'm resonating more with libertarians than I am with people in my old milieu that I was more accustomed to, and still where a lot of my friends are. Well, you can't put new wine into old skins. And we've been trying to pour new wine into old skins for a long time, a lot longer than I thought it could go on. So maybe this is the moment where it's clearer in the United States, the hope that a third party could emerge, because our politics is more difficult. But if the NDP is just the Liberals, and I don't know where it'll come from, but I think we desperately need a new definition, a new and broader definition of constitutes politics. And my hope would be that the CC would lead that, but it isn't happening right now. It's really forsaken the whole. It's largely forsaken the whole field. I mean, it's so shocking. I mean, the first night of the convoy, I turned on the National, and Ian Hannamansing, I'm not making this up, had an interview with a trucker in North Dakota who opposed this manifestation. They never went and talked to anybody. They already knew to get an opponent on. And like, how is that doing your duty to make the country known to itself, and make its factions known to one another?
Yeah.
That's a dereliction of duty, And
Can I jump off of that and
please,
to speak to the question that you raised, Marcus, is one thing that I see in young adults is this feeling that the world that they live in cannot be penetrated or understood by someone like me at the age that I am, and so they feel alienated. And as someone that doesn't use social media, the last thing that they want to hear from me is a diatribe against social media. But instead, drawing them into different ways of being by subtle invitation. And here in our house, as you know, Marcus, I think it's done via food often.
Yep.
Of drawing people around the table, in which good food and good drink and conversation is had, and then that, I don't know, that starts to, I think, build subtle critiques within them about what social media is not providing them. Of that, that rich engagement between people, suggests a different way of being. And so last night, in fact, in spite of the fact that it was 35 below, They had it outside, a whole pile of them, played in the snow, and came back in and had dessert and played games until all ends of the night. And these, a lot of these people, for most, are known as gamers, people that can't be reached, and they feel like no one has an interest in them.
No.
Well, you, Hugh.
Yeah, I appreciate this conversation. I've watched, I watched things like everybody did over the last week in Ottawa. I have a different take on things. Partly, I think, because of the work I do, because, I've been dealing with, guys with extremist views, Islamic extremists for a number of years. We've been trying to create meaningful interventions to connect with them and connect them back to their faith tradition, and challenge some of their more extreme ideologies. We're seeing more, I think, more extremism these days within kind of, for lack of a better term, the white nationalist community, right? One of the actors in Ottawa is from Nova Scotia, right? And he apparently is fairly connected in the US, and he left a number of weapons charges before he left here to go to Ottawa. In January, he left court and went to Ottawa. And so I guess I have concerns about, I think there's a need to not scapegoat, and a need to find common ground, but there's also a need to deal with people who are using these kinds of gatherings to really further agendas which are pretty challenging to our democracy. The mass casualty commission started meeting yesterday in Nova Scotia. So maybe because I'm in Nova Scotia, we lived through that 2 years ago, and there's an awareness of the damage that that kind of violence can cause, but in one sense, I hear the concern about finding a new space, a new political space, a new common ground, But I've been saying to my girls, both of whom are, as some of you know, both of whom are Asian. We adopted our daughters in China. As we've watched this together over the last week, I said the Chinese Communist Party had a way of dealing with this in 1989, and amongst their brightest and best, the students in Tiananmen Square, they simply brought in tanks and brought in weapons and slaughtered everybody, So in the whole scheme of things, I think the way that this has been dealt with in Ottawa, it could have gone a lot worse. I mean, but I do think that there was a measured approach there that I would hope. I'm glad that in the end that it was a more measured approach than it could have been, right? So it's a tough one. I don't consider myself to be particularly conservative, right? I politically but I found my response to this was more traditional and conservative than I would have seen myself as being, and I'm trying to balance that with my faith commitment, and the fact that there were a lot of people from churches there preaching and doing other things on the street, and on that thing they set up across from just across on Wellington Street, and on streets that I walk every day when I'm in Ottawa. I know that area of the city very well. So it's a really tough one. I think in a sense, those voices and those people who were there trying to do harm, or to use a lot of people to further their agendas, like this guy from Mackenzie from here in Halifax, who it was his weapons that they discovered at the border crossing at Coots, right? Those people are affiliated with this militia that he apparently has started, right? And so, I think we need to, maybe you could say, if you're seeing this movement as somehow benign and optimistic, maybe, is a bit of what I'm hearing. Maybe, the corruption of the best is the worst. There are people there who had pretty nefarious agendas that needed to be weeded out, I think, and it'll be interesting to see whether that happens in the court processes that have been initiated, right? Whether they can separate the wheat from the chaff and recognize that some people were there because they had legitimate grievances, but other people were there because they really wanted to cause harm to our democracy, right? So anyway, those are some reflections, and over it all is the grappling with what you've written, David, and both the implicit challenge and very rich consideration there, and what I've come to value in Girard's ability to, I think his prophetic insight, into both, the human heart and larger movements in society, right? And
Did you mean Girard or Illich just at the end?
no, I mean Girard, but I see them as very much sort of, to use another term, in a sense, brothers in arms, right? There is a lot of overlap in some of the ways that they think and view the world, I think.
Yeah. You should read Marcus Rempel's book if you haven't had the chance.
I'd like to, and I'm really thrilled to hear about this guy in the Swarm that you and Rodney have just spoken about, David. Because I want to connect with my girls and their generation, which is a very interesting generation, right?
Well,
so, thanks for listening as I reflect.
Yeah.
Can I say one thing in response? Which is
absolutely, yeah.
I'm a media hound. It's what I did, and so it's in a certain way what I've continued to do. Read various newspapers, look across the board at media, and all I'm saying about who was in Ottawa is that I think the primary manifestation, which I called an eruption from the political unconscious, has to be looked at more than what's trying to eat at the edges of it. And second, I think a lot of unsubstantiated allegations were made by our cabinet ministers and others who suggested that this was being manipulated from elsewhere, anything that could suggest that it was not a popular manifestation, but that it was a manipulated one. And very often no evidence was given. And this is a real problem, right? I heard that somebody who was wearing a mask was chased and knocked down. Oh, who? Well, I don't know. I heard it. So I need substantiation. I won't accept on faith that Steve Bannon was hiding under a truck on Kent Street, and until it's shown to me that I never saw the Nazi flag.
Hard to hide Steve Bannon
heard
anywhere, David.
Well, maybe, yeah, because he's under indictment, isn't he? But
Yes, he is.
I mean, the Nazi flag, all right? Was there a Nazi flag? Somebody who was there on that Saturday said they heard there was somebody down by the river with a Nazi flag. It was never shown. There's never a picture of it. There was a picture of the Confederate flag. There was a picture of a Canadian flag with a swastika scrawled on it, which is clearly a crude political statement rather than an affirmation of National Socialism. Maybe it existed, but I haven't seen it. And so the Prime Minister has seized on things that to me are barely there, and in order to not look at the main thing, which if he entered into conversation with it, would be the surest guarantee we could have that what is at the edges doesn't eat farther in, that this doesn't turn really nasty and doesn't become, because this is what I've been trying to say. I mean, what our enemies become what we imagine them to be, right? Because we're fighting Nazism, right? But suddenly we're setting Hamburg on fire. We're incinerating a whole city in a firestorm because we're so appalled by what the others have done. And 40 years later, when the CBC puts The Valor and the Horror on the air, it still can't be faced.
Yeah.
Right? Our own genocide still can't be faced.
Yeah.
And I thought that's the enemy dynamic that I'm not. I don't want to be innocent or say there was nobody in Ottawa that I would have loved all these guys. I think there were some I wouldn't have loved. Right? The same way I don't disbelieve the sick trucker who says he was abused at the Alberta border by somebody. I bet he was. Right? There's certainly anti-immigration sentiment in the country. It's there. Right? But if it isn't, yeah.
Can I?
Yes. I've
I was
said
going to
enough.
say, David, I'm following you completely. This has been burning in me. But I will say that there's an independent paper out here or online journal that has a picture of the dude with the swastika. But
Okay,
they're
good.
wanting, they have a reward for anyone who can identify him because it was one, and they suspect it was even a plant, which that's starting to happen now, where on either side someone might show up.
Photoshopping, etc. Oh yeah.
Cameras all come to focus on the one rather than the many. And then Jonathan Kay, I don't know if you all know Jonathan Kay, but
I do, yeah.
yeah, so he went after Bernie Ferber, I think his name is, of the anti-hate.
Bernie Farber, yeah, he used to be that. Yeah.
So he went after
the Jewish. He used to be with the Jewish Canadian Congress, I think. Yeah.
So Jonathan Kay, who is himself Jewish, went after him because he had reposted, a friend tweeted this out, and it was a picture of a propaganda on the wall Nazi propaganda. And Jonathan Kay quickly responded with a retweet saying, oh, look at the same wall and the same paper was in Florida 2 months ago. Isn't that strange? And this is the thing, is that we're so easily manipulated by our social media. It's so easily done. And reading in unheard.com, the out of the UK, about the nudge unit that the Prime Minister's office uses, the nudge theory, which is social behavior applied to policy and applied to what we used to call propaganda, right? That we're being nudged, and admission is coming out that maybe we nudged a little too far. Maybe we've nudged a little too much into fear. This is where Rene Girard's, mimetic theory is probably needing vastly to be applied. Left and right, we're seeing signs of mimetic fear and mimetic, the scapegoating mechanism, and so on. So we have to be so alert to how we're being played. And that's where I'm beginning to think it does come to the sitting around the table and knowing one another. I couldn't do a Zoom course well with my students unless we had met face to face. So I made a point of meeting with them out under the tree before we had to go online, kind of thing. Like,
That's nice.
I think it is this, what you were saying about relinquishment, being prepared to relinquish. And that's what I hear, Marcus, in Alana's piece, is a kind of relinquishment and a humbling and an opening up to the other. And at the same time, affirming and celebrating. So I'm so heartened by how Illich's time is coming. And if there was dead space, when you dropped that interview with him and there was nada, the time is coming. Like, I think my students are understanding Girard, and I think they will understand Illich now better than they did before.
And hence that series of publications, right? That's coming out right now, Illich for the 21st Century, but that David's was the second of.
Yes.
I know people will maybe want to go, but I'm looking at our time. We're 10 minutes beyond the time we've normally set aside, but that doesn't mean we have to stop. But could I just for a moment interject about next time? We have 2 chapters and then a conclusion and an epilogue and a conclusion. So that's 4. Is that the thought, that we'll finish that, and then next time we'll decide where and what we may want to go, or do we continue, and so on? Any quick comments on that? We're just a small group, but that's fine.
I think that sounds like a good plan. It sounds like a fairly logical, in terms of the project as we engaged on it together. And then I think we should leave some time at the end of next meeting to explore, what people have energy for next,
and see where that takes us, if it does at all. And we'll, okay, so we could be thinking on that. And then the other is, Catherine, are you open, if you're going to be available next time, to kind of get us started? I failed utterly this time because I couldn't get on, but to get us started and maybe to kind of bring it to a conclusion. Are you open to do that the next time?
Sure, I will confirm. I'll look at the date and confirm, but sure, thank you.
Okay, because I think it's just nice to pass that around, and Matthew couldn't do it, and I thought I would, but anyway, at the last. So now, can we leave it this way, that for those who wish to continue discussion, and I'm one of those, I would love to listen at least, and maybe interject at times, but at least anyone else who feels it's time to move on with other things to do will obviously acknowledge that as well, if that sounds okay.
I think I could hang around for maybe another 20 minutes or so.
Okay, I could too. David,
That's
are you
fine.
available?
I'm not in a hurry.
Okay.
I've got to go make spaghetti for my daughters, so I'm
Hugh?
late
Well-
for that task.
How old are how old are your girls now?
Liv is 20 and Izzy is 17. So,
Wow.
yeah. And they're upstairs making it's reading week, and so my daughter's making a dress. I don't know why that's happening, but that happens a lot
Wow.
around here.
Well, before you go, Hugh, I just wanted to say thanks. I've really appreciated this conversation, and I appreciate you going out on a limb and kind of sharing some of the countervailing tension, which is very, very real in this conversation. And I'm so grateful to be having that tension aired in this kind of a conversation. I haven't, frankly, I've spent very little time with the news in the last week because I can't bear it. I get too upset. You know, I'll take little pieces here and there and get it have this profound sense that people are just talking past each other in these various media channels, and it feels very significant to be part of a conversation where people are genuinely engaging with each other around, a hell of a mess.
And they'll acknowledge that we're doing this all virtually, which is not the ideal, and yet it's been very convivial every time, and I love that and respect it, and so appreciate. Thank you.
Well, and I'm very comfortable doing that because those I know in the circle I trust. So, which is David and Wayne and sort of by extension Ron. And I'm appreciating the opportunity to get to know others. So that's I think you're right. We need more of these kinds of conversations, not less, not fewer.
Yeah.
So.
I'm curious who the owner is that joined in here. Is that...
Oh, now that's interesting. I just saw that too. I have no idea. That isn't I.
Owner, please
You're the
identify
owner.
yourself.
You're the owner, if anyone. Yeah.
Administrator is on my screen right now, but that's you, Wayne. No?
I don't know how that showed up as that, but maybe because you did that, Marcus, when you knew you couldn't be there at the start, and then as it turned out, I couldn't. The owner's about to identify himself. He's just connecting.
I just asked him to unmute. Yeah. Is that
Tay
coming back in?
Well, I wonder if Tay stayed on so that the link. I
took the host chair back when I came back in.
From Tay. Okay.
Yeah.
And the owner is trying to, I think, connect audio, but so far.
Well, we'll trust they're a friend for now. I believe I do have it in my power to give people the boot, but I won't.
I gotta go to dinner. Thanks, everybody. Okay. See you next month.
Bye, see you, Hugh. Bye.
Take good care.
David, do you know what volumes are planned in the Illich set?
Well, quite a few potentially, but the series editor is my friend Sajay Samuel.
Yeah,
and I know he's got lots of ideas. And he's also started a website, which I guess I haven't mentioned that, called Thinking After Illich.
Oh, wow.
Which contains a little online journal of which he prints a few copies called Conspiratio, and various other sections. He's very eager to have contributors. If anybody wants to consider Illich connected writing, he'd be delighted. So it's called Thinking After Illich. I think if you look that up, you'll get the website.
Okay.
Is it there? Yeah. So the main thing that I want to see in that series is that in the fall of 2002, Ivan sent me a package. He considered it a finished manuscript of a book that was known in his circle as Mirror 2, because the first collection of his essays from the early 90s was called In the Mirror of the Past. That's the one where the essay on life appears, for example, and many other remarkable works. So Mirror 2 was a later, well, it went, some of those papers were given in the late 80s and after. And many of them are remarkable. Most all of them are available online if you know what you're looking for, through a website that Celia Samirsky operates. Or there's a guy who used to be at the McCormick Theological Seminary who's got a lot of it online. So if you know what you're looking for, you can find it. But I would really like to see those essays appear in English between two covers. So that would be the first priority for me, Rod, would be to get that out. And most of them have appeared in every other modern European language because complete works have been done in French, now in Italian. And so, yeah. And then I think various other commentators, might also be interested in writing about Illich.
Mm-hmm.
But first get his work out would be my, and there's a number of essays in there that I, one called Posthumous Longevity, which was an open letter to a group of cloistered Benedictine nuns. One called Text and University, which I think is a very important essay. The Educational Enterprise and the Light of the Gospel, which was one of his most open statements about his own faith. All these things are quoted in my book. But
I've looked
they're
up a lot of them.
And they're all, you can find them if you look.
Yeah.
If you look through my references, you'll find them all. But I would really love to see them come out. So I hope that'll be next. But Ivan's literary executor, Valentina Boromans, is a very old woman now, was his colleague at CDOC, and she's a little bit stubborn at times. And so she hasn't been willing to see that. And I even tried to force her hand at one point by sending the essays to Harvard University Press through connecting through Charles Taylor, but they didn't want them at that point.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I feel I've stopped that conversation to inject this. So is there something to pick up from before I came in and said, well, maybe we're a little bit late already? Anyone want to jump back into the, or anything else, obviously?
Well, I don't know. I have a burning question for David, if that's okay. In the past, the reference to Illich after gender kind of falling out of favor, right? And that's often the way that his career, I don't know if you want to put it that crass way, but his life is narrated, right? That he's kind of jet setting, all over and in demand, and then gender happens, and it's kind of like, bang. But I've often wondered about that after gender and the way that he lives out his life. Then I've wondered if that wasn't in some way kind of the logical turn of his own philosophy.
He faked his own suicide.
Well, but
suicide.
No.
I mean,
Sorry, Rod.
like it said, turn back into conviviality. That conviviality really is only something if two people know each other. And the jet setting life, I often thought seemed at odds to his old philosophy.
Well, I think that's right. Did you want to say more?
No, I
I
don't
mean,
know if that makes sense.
I think that the change to put everything on gender as the divide
yeah,
is radically oversimplifying.
yeah,
It's a convenient way to tell a story, and of course, it's partly true.
sure.
But I would say that already that period of jet setting was over when CDOC closed, right? That he really, I think, I mean, perhaps it was intoxicating. It must have been intoxicating. I mean, I can remember him telling us a story about Pierre Trudeau, that Trudeau was so eager to converse with Ivan, and he had to be in Toronto, and there was a big snow emergency, and that Trudeau said, "No problem. We'll get you an army vehicle. We'll get you there. Like just stay and talk, right?" Well, presumably, when the mighty want to talk to you that much, there must be
Sure.
it must in a little bit go to your head, and he was certainly in demand, but I think for the most part it was a yoga that he ascesis, if you to take a more Christian term, that he just felt that this was the moment, right, and that he had to seize it. Whatever the difficulties, that the moment wouldn't come again. The time was now, and in fact, the writings of that period are suffused with that idea, right, of kairos, of now is the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even to the point where now one has to ask, really? Deschooling is imminent? And you can reinterpret the statement in retrospect and say, well, deschooling was imminent, in the sense that the chance to disestablish compulsory schooling was now or never. It just didn't happen in that way, but it happened in another way, which was disillusionment set in, right? That people's attachment to the school system became extremely instrumental, right? This is how my children are going to keep the advantages that I have. This is the road to success. The idea of the school system as a democratic imperative did fade, right? So deschooling in that sense happened, but it's in that sense, it's probably a kind of a analogy with the gospel entering through the back door, right? The revelation occurring through the mysterium iniquitatis rather than through the good news. So I think a watershed is already in 76 when CDOC closes, and he spends a lot of very congenial, adventurous time in India, in Southeast Asia, in Japan. I think he really enjoyed relations with the Palanyi Society in Japan. So I think he already had, he was always a global guy. So in that sense, he remained a jet setter. So I think the road he was on, that of which gender is kind of a report from the front, a kind of wild and whirling report from the front. He's already well on that road, and the movement, as we used to call it, is already fragmenting, right? So he's not going to hold it together. He's not going to take the feminists along on the road he wants to walk,
Yeah.
right? And they see it right away, right? I mean, I think, as I said in my book, I mean, that, you know, they were looking for a better seat on the gravy train, and he was looking to get off. And those weren't compatible agendas at that time. If you look in the very crude kind of terms in which politics usually plays out. So yeah, but it was certainly a blessing in the sense that by the time I got connected with him again in the later 80s, 87, he was kind of doing what he wanted with the people he wanted to do it with, and you know, mostly those were people who he dealt with as equals. He might have been first amongst equals, but he was really living with the people he loved, and so yeah, I think that, and I don't know how it could have been different. So he didn't choose it, but it played out in that way. Is that an answer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could it be too, when you speak of Kairos, the time for him to speak? It was the time for him to speak, but perhaps it was not the time for it to be understood and applied in the way that he thought. And time is a funny thing. we it's elastic, and potentially now is the time. You know, maybe he was so far avant-garde, it's landing now a little bit more. Is that possible?
I think it's entirely possible. I mean, I think he probably I don't know that he ever tried to relate these two things together, but he clearly felt by the early 80s that the world was changing in a way that made a lot of what he had said in the early 70s lose its pertinence, lose its grip, because he saw himself as having, as writing in the twilight of the age of tools, without really knowing that he was doing it until he became aware that the age of systems was quickly swallowing the age of tools, and that a lot of his political proposals implied an old idea of the citizen or the public standing apart from tools that they could use or not use, change or approve. His whole image changed. You know, the whole sense of what the world is changed at that moment for him, and I think we're now farther down that road and recuperating things that he said. For me, this is absolutely a moment of Kairos. I think what happened, I'm surprised to hear myself saying this, but I think that what happens in the next 2 years is going to determine the future for a long time. That's gut. I couldn't defend it, but I think the pandemic has revealed some really, really alarming tendencies, and if we can't somehow get a grip, it's gonna yeah, the doors are going to close.
So David, will this piece that you've just said and you prefaced with, can't believe I'm saying this, is this something to put onto your blog? I think all of us would benefit from understanding how you tease that out. And obviously there's probably no time to do it other than in a very brief way you've done it right now. Is that?
Well, I would really like to do that, Wayne. I mean, I'm a little bit torn between this CBC work,
Yeah, okay.
and more current
Yeah.
writing.
Okay, yeah.
But I think ideally I need to do both, and I'm going to try and find a way to do it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because that time frame that you have in mind, at least, I think there's a compulsion, if that's where your thinking is, to help us to understand better.
Well, to me, 2 years is off the top of my head.
I know,
you know,
I know.
maybe I should have
Still, some of that.
said 5 years or
Yeah,
3 years, or and Catherine said, and it's true, time is elastic, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, the ruins of time builds mansions in eternity. So you know, I think it's the other side of that kairos is probably a sense of humor. Probably a sense that that moment is for somebody always the moment, right? That as sort of the axiom in broadcasting for me was George Grant drew my attention to a statement of Strauss's, that where he says that, you know, his advice to teachers is always assume there's one listener in your audience who's got a finer mind and a nobler spirit than you do. And that was good. That was good. That was good advice. I like that. And similarly, so you never know what's happening, right? You never know who you're talking to. And I mean, in broadcasting also, then I had kind of come into the CBC very much under the spell of Paulo Freire and the idea that everything was dialogic. So I was very happy to be reminded years later by this man I mentioned, John Durham Peters, who's a media theorist who teaches at Yale, that the primary Christian model is not dialogue, it's dissemination, right? It's the parable of the sower. It's like that you don't know. You don't know where the seed's going to fall. You just throw it. And so I'm sure that's true at all times. And things wouldn't be nearly as clear cut as that kind of dramatic statement implies.
Okay. That's helpful. There's been a long-standing understanding the kingdom is.
It's now or never, and it's always.
That's right. And the kingdom idea is already but not yet. And I suppose you could say that of kairos, which is also that already but not yet. So
yeah. So,
Marcus, do you hear? I'm thinking about CBC, and I'm thinking about how there was a regional sensibility at one time when I was growing up. I felt like that got lost along the way, and that has to do, I think, with the machine or the age of systems that that sensibility we have in Illich, that's what our new watershed is. I wonder, David, if that's what's going to emerge again. Like Marcus, I know you're on a farm, Alana, who I was speaking about earlier, that says it's, we're an ecosystem. I'm wondering if the sensibility amongst young people about how life is interconnected, but each creature has its own habitat, and communities we're hearing the term ecosystem a lot in all sorts of ways. And I wonder if maybe CBC has rediscover its regionalism again, while being our national broadcaster. And if vernacular, a rediscovery of vernacular is what you are going to bring to them again, in a new way, though, of course, right? Can't go back. As much as I weep over some of the National Film Board films are so beautiful, and that's the Canada I love. How do we have some creative reappropriation of regional vernacular again?
You don't expect me to answer that, right?
Is it part of your vision? Is that part of your
Oh, yeah.
vision for
Oh, yeah.
CBC?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think
good.
it's although maybe it will be more after what you just said, but I think it's, yeah, that, but I mean, that's manifest in the truckers thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, my wife, listening to the way the truckers were talking about, remembered early 70s feminism, right? I'm being whistled at by construction workers. Oh, poor me. Like that. There was a kind of distaste for these guys as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a class thing. It's also a
Yeah.
regional thing, right?
Yeah.
These are country people
Mm-hmm.
showing, and in some ways, right? They're they not all. Some of them may be urban. Some of them may live in Calgary. Some of them may live in Medicine Hat. But it's very much, the CBC is for an urban Canada, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not. It's lost a lot of its roots in the country, I think, and doesn't even like the country very much, right? The country is full of rubes and white supremacists.
And Marcus's. Marcus is in the country. So that's what I mean. Like there's this.
And I'm listening to the CBC less and less.
Right.
I'm afraid to say.
Yeah. So how might they rediscover the rural, and that it's beautiful, and that there's a lot of young people that are finding the rural because they sure can't afford downtown Vancouver or even Lower Mainland, out here. That's the youth are having to move into rural. So
yeah,
maybe that will entice them.
Well, I think that's happening. Lots of things are happening that are not being made visible. So yes, maybe that's a kind of answer to your question, is that, or made audible. I'm a radio guy, right? I never made anything visible, but it was, yeah, but made audible, brought to attention. Yeah, I hope it'll happen. Okay, my dears, what do you say we wind this up?
Sounds good.
Yeah, Wayne?
Yeah, by all means. David, any last word, or anyone else to sort of bring us to a close? I don't have one.
After a long week of despair, thank you for this bright moment. I'm with you, Marcus.
That's a very sweet last word. Let's end with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gratitude is my last word. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. And I'm looking forward to our next discussion, because you can all think about apocalypse, not just me. Because the central, the paradox that I tried to draw out in that chapter, that Ivan is a completely apocalyptic thinker and he's a completely non-apocalyptic thinker, I think it's crucial, and that's what I'd like to talk about. So you guys can start thinking about it too.
Okay.
All right.
I've seen that word showing up in a lot of places, so I'm anticipating something here.
Yeah.
Revelation.
All right, a revelation. Yeah.
Yes.
Don't touch that dial. All right. Bye, Catherine.
Bye.
Bye,
to
Wayne.
all. Thank you, thank you.
Bye, Marcus. Is Rod still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, bless you, Rod. That was great.
Take care.
Bye.
Talk to you next time. Bye.